Hello, I'm John Tankard, Senior Comprehensive Planner with the Tulsa Planning Office. This presentation will include an introduction to Planet Tulsa and our update process, and then we'll cover the new things in the plan that our team has developed. Finally, the presentation will cover how you can leave us your feedback on the plan. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions that aren't answered in the presentation, please email us at planetulsa@incog.org. So what is a comprehensive plan? Well, the state of Oklahoma has statutory language that enables municipalities to develop and adopt comprehensive plans in order to accomplish a variety of things. One of the primary functions of the plan is how it relates to land use development, and state statute states that it is, quote, for the purpose of bringing about a coordinated physical development in accordance with the present and future needs of such area. This guidance means comprehensive plans almost always serve as a city's land use plan, which is used to inform decisions made by the Planning Commission and the City Council related to land use development. Beyond land use, comprehensive plans are also used to make recommendations to conserve the natural resources of an area, ensure the efficient expenditure of public funds, and to promote the well-being of the residents in a community. Cities across the country develop comprehensive plans that fit their community, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach to comprehensive plans. We're proud to have developed this plan update in-house at the Tulsa Planning Office, rather than relying on outside consultants. Our staff live in Tulsa, work with the members of the community on a daily basis, and have strong relationships with the people at the city who do the work across all of the different departments. By doing the plan in-house, it's a product of the city, not a product for the city, and we think that will have a very beneficial result as the updated plan is implemented. While Tulsa had a few comprehensive plans prior to 1976, I want to start there as that was the last time Tulsa had updated their plan before 2010 when Plan of Tulsa was originally adopted. That was a gap of 34 years, and this time it's only been 12 years since the plan was reworked. The plan adopted in 1976 was for both the City of Tulsa and Tulsa County, while Planet Tulsa is solely for the city. In 1989, the form of Tulsa's government changed from a commission to a strong mayor and city council form of government. People were already talking about updating the 1976 plan at that time, but it would take quite a bit more time for that to occur. It wasn't until 2005 that a task force was assembled by the City Council and then Mayor Bill LaFortune to develop a process for updating the comprehensive plan. 2 years later, in 2007, during Mayor Kathy Taylor's term, Preganesi Associates were hired with a team of 7 sub-consulting firms to create the new plan. The process for updating the plan was called Planet Tulsa, but over the years, the name has stuck around and has become synonymous with the Tulsa Comprehensive Plan. After 3 more years, in 2010, during Mayor Dewey Bartlett's term, the new plan was adopted by the City of Tulsa. The plan has been in place since then, and in 2016, a progress report was developed by staff to evaluate the implementation of the plan. So why are we doing an update? After 10 years of the plan being in place, city leaders sought an update of the comprehensive plan to reflect new ideas and conditions. Since 2010, there have been vast improvements in techniques of data analysis and new approaches that are conscious of residents' health and wellness, equity, resilience, and more. And in the last 12 years, there have been many other plans that have been adopted that needed to be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. In 2019, the Tulsa Planning Office was founded, which brought together all of the planning functions of the City of Tulsa into one office for the first time in decades. Prior to this, INCOG had been the home to the current planning functions of the city and administered the processes of the Tulsa Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, or TMABC, and the City of Tulsa Board of Adjustment, or BOA. Long-range planning functions, such as developing plans like Planet Tulsa, were part of the city rather than INCOG. By bringing these functions together, there is a new level of coordination between the different staff and the different planning functions, and it's led to a more effective planning environment for the City of Tulsa. We've also made great efforts to hire staff members with the skills needed to create plans in-house, which has the benefits I mentioned before of creating plans that are more tailored to Tulsa's context, but also saves the taxpayers a great deal of money by replacing the need for contracts with consulting firms, which can run into the millions of dollars for the development of a comprehensive plan. Our process began in 2019 with work that was preliminary to the development of the plan document and took a little over a year and a half. Our internal teamwork included a great deal of review of existing plans in Tulsa, comprehensive plans from across the United States, site visits to better understand areas of the city, and meetings with city department leaders. Our team did extensive external engagement to inform the content of the plan, working with more than 200 Tulsa organizations that provided their knowledge and expertise, as well as thousands of Tulsa residents across 18 public input sessions, public meetings about specialized topics like infill development and the development review process, and numerous surveys across the variety of topics covered in chapters in the plan. The development of the plan itself began after all of the preliminary internal and external teamwork was completed. Our team organized all of the input we had received to create the content for the updated plan. This content was reviewed closely with city department leadership in order to ensure that the people who will be involved in the implementation of the plan are familiar with and have contributed to the plan content. And now we've moved into our external review phase, and we will make sure everyone who wants to contribute their thoughts has an opportunity to do so before we move into the plan adoption process. For this plan update, many new things have been introduced based on input we received during the planning process, best practices from cities across the country, data analysis, and other plans that have been adopted in Tulsa since the 2010 adoption of Planet Tulsa. The 2010 plan has 5 chapters: land use, transportation, economic development, housing, and parks, trails, and open space. As mentioned previously, state statute provides broad discretion to municipalities to include a variety of topics in the comprehensive plan, and we've widened the scope of the plan to include topics that weren't covered previously. Firstly, the land use, transportation, and economic development chapters remained and were updated. The future land use chapter recommendations cover topics like zoning, development regulations, and patterns of development. The transportation chapter consolidates recommendations from many plans for automobiles, public transportation, walking, cycling, and transportation innovations like electric vehicles and micromobility. The economic development chapter includes recommendations for topics such as incentives, commercial districts, entrepreneurship, and workforce development. We modified the next 2 chapters. We expanded the content of the housing chapter to housing and neighborhoods. This chapter has recommendations related to housing affordability, homelessness, neighborhood characteristics, and city programs related to strengthening neighborhoods. And we split the parks, trails, and open space chapter into 2 chapters. Parks and Recreation, which covers recommendations related to programmed outdoor spaces like parks and trails, and Environment and Natural Resources, which covers things like tree canopy coverage, pollution, flooding, energy use, and sustainability. We've also added 4 new chapters. The Development Review Guide I will cover in detail in a few slides, but in summary, we've consolidated the most relevant parts of the plan for the process of development review in one place in the plan. We've added a chapter called Communities, which addresses civic engagement and how the local government can better communicate and engage with Tulsans, particularly those who have been historically disengaged. We've also added a chapter called History, Culture, and Creativity. Tulsa stands apart from other cities in Oklahoma for the rich historical context, cultural significance, and commitment to the arts. So we added this chapter to address how the city government can better support these things. Finally, we've added a chapter called Public Services. This chapter includes recommendations for many city departments that were not included in the 2010 plan, including public safety, municipal courts, water and sewer, solid waste, and more. All of the chapters of the plan, other than the Development Review Guide, follow the same organizational structure as you can see in this example table of contents. Each chapter begins with a short introduction that explains the content of the chapter, existing conditions in Tulsa, and what we heard from the community. Next, in order to make the plan easier to use, each goal of the plan has a page in the plan with a description of the goal and strategies to achieve the goal. Each chapter also has an action table, which goes into greater detail than the goals and strategies pages, adding a level of recommendations under each strategy. These actions are organized by type in which city departments or adjacent agencies should be involved in the implementation. This organizational structure is new to the plan and will be very helpful in using the plan as a reference guide, as well as for collaboration among involved parties to implement the plan. Each chapter of the plan also includes sections that put the subject matter into different contexts. For each chapter, metrics were identified to compare Tulsa to cities from around the United States, and over time, these metrics can help evaluate Tulsa's success in achieving the goals of the plan. There is also a section that identifies potential considerations for the impact on the health and wellness of Tulsans, as well as a section that identifies potential considerations related to social equity and resilience, in keeping with the guidance provided by the Resilient Tulsa Strategy and the annual Equality Indicators reports. Each chapter also includes a section that lists funding priorities that emerged through our engagement during the planning process. And finally, as Tulsa is the central and largest city in our metropolitan area, considerations about how Tulsa fits into a regional context are detailed for each chapter. One of the more exciting changes to the plan is our increased focus on accessibility. We've scoured plans from around the United States, and as far as we can find, Planet Tulsa will be the first fully bilingual plan in the entire country. Tulsa's Hispanic population has grown rapidly over the past 40 years, and this effort will help to bridge any barriers for households for whom Spanish is their primary spoken language. We've also taken the time to ensure that all maps, graphs, and charts are colorblind friendly. Terminology can be a barrier to understanding content in a plan, so we've created glossaries for each chapter of the plan. And where those terms show up in the text, we've turned those into links that can take you to the glossary to learn what the term means. We've also included alternative text for all photographs in the plan and have been testing our plan with screen readers that people with visual disabilities use in order to use computers. All of these efforts are consistent with what we heard in our engagement. So rather than simply write down that these things are important and put them into the recommendations section of the plan, we wanted to make sure this plan itself was more accessible than any plan we've produced before. I mentioned the development review guide previously, and now I'm going to detail why we made it and what benefits it will add to the usability of the plan. So I've used the phrase development review several times now, but what does that phrase really mean? Well, development refers to any modification to a piece of property in the city, particularly when something new is being built. And review refers to the internal processes of the city to ensure that new development, when it requires changes to the zoning of a property, is appropriate based on regulations and guidance of the city government. This guide is meant to consolidate in one easily referenced place all of the necessary information to understand the steps of the process, as well as all geographically specific guidance of the comprehensive plan that is considered when determining appropriateness of various applications for development. If you look at this table of contents, you can see that the first section of the guide includes an explanation of the process, the relevant decision-making bodies and their processes, as well as what other codes and planning documents are potentially relevant to a development project. We've also included a section on engagement expectations, as the more communication with surrounding residents happens, the more likely a project's final form will be welcomed by neighbors. Next, the land use plan includes the land use map and descriptions of the various land use designations, which I'll address on the next slide. We've added a new concept called development era, in order to provide some distinction between what types of development are more appropriate in different areas of the city based on the urban form that underlies these areas. I'll also go into more detail on this section later. Another complementary plan to the comprehensive plan is the Major Street and Highway Plan, which guides the city for planning for future transportation needs. Planet Tulsa includes an overlay of that plan to identify where different street types should influence development. Finally, we've included a series of maps and guidance related to a variety of topics, many of which correspond with the other chapters of the plan, and many of which emerged through our engagement with the public, where we learned what common concerns related to development are, including impacts on tree canopy, flooding, traffic, and economic development. One of the changes we've made to the plan is to simplify the system of land use designations that comprise the land use plan map, which is referenced to determine if rezonings are appropriate. On the left are the designations that are in the 2010 plan, and on the right is our updated simplified list. Firstly, we consolidated existing neighborhood, downtown neighborhood, and new neighborhood into one category, neighborhood. I referenced the concept of development eras earlier, and that will provide the distinction for this designation in different parts of the city. Next, we've narrowed our types of centers from neighborhood, town, and regional centers to local centers and regional centers. It has been difficult to differentiate these designations, particularly neighborhood and town, so this change allows for a clear distinction where local centers are mostly commercial areas that serve surrounding neighborhoods, while regional centers are commercial areas centered around uses of regional significance, such as a hospital, university, or major shopping area. We've consolidated all areas designated as mixed-use corridor or Main Street into a new category, multiple use, since not all areas where the designation makes sense are constrained to corridors, and to reduce confusion with the city's mixed-use zoning districts. I mentioned the Major Street and Highway Plan on the previous slide, and that's where the streets designated as Main Street exist now, so as to apply to both the street and property along the street. The remaining 4 land use designations, downtown, employment, park and open space, and Arkansas River Corridor, remain the same. Our updates to the map derived from these changes made to the designations and then minor modifications to ensure a consistent approach to land use planning, making the process more understandable and predictable. One of the biggest concerns we've received during our public engagement of this planning process was that the plan doesn't adequately guide development for what's appropriate in a given context. What's appropriate for new subdivisions at the edge of the city are not necessarily what's appropriate for infill development adjacent to the downtown area. We also heard that there is a great concern that new development should be considerate of historical context. And with that, we decided to learn more about how the city developed over time, with the goal of identifying unique characteristics in parts of the city based on when it developed. This map shows all existing properties in the city based on what decade they were constructed. As you can see, there is a gradient that extends from the first areas that developed, the downtown area, outward to the city limits, particularly towards the south. This animation shows development over time in 5-year increments, and you can learn a lot about how the city developed from this. For example, before the proliferation of the automobile, the footprint of the city grew very slowly. But then when you get to the area of the interstate highway system, we see enormous new growth beyond I-44 and in the surrounding suburban communities like Jinx, Owasso, and Broken Arrow. Now, I'm going to walk through the different eras of development in Tulsa's history, and I want to highlight 3 significant differences in the pattern of urban form as time progresses. Firstly, straight streets are replaced with curvilinear streets. Second, the level of street connectivity decreases. And finally, residential uses become more separated from other uses. Zooming into the first era, we're calling the downtown era, which originally developed in the early 20th century around the Frisco Railroad, prior to the introduction of a streetcar system or the proliferation of automobiles. Today, many of the structures in downtown were built in the 1970s and 1980s, corresponding to the clearing of city blocks during urban renewal and economic fluctuations. This map shows downtown's tight grid of straight streets. Properties that are solely residential are in gray, while non-residential uses or mixed-use properties are in red. There's a high degree of mixing of these use types, and strictly residential properties are generally high density. The next era is the streetcar era. These parts of the city originally developed between the 1910s and the 1930s, facilitated by the expansion of the city's streetcar network. Since this time period, there's been steady redevelopment activity through subsequent decades. In this era, we still have a grid of straight streets with a high degree of street connectivity, but residential and non-residential uses are a bit more separated than in the previous era, with most non-residential uses along a half-mile grid of major streets, with some non-residential uses mixed into residential areas. The next era is the early automobile era, which primarily developed during the 1930s to the 1950s, and has seen a relatively low level of redevelopment since then. From the time of the Great Depression through World War II, and prior to the development of the interstate highway system, Tulsa's land use pattern became more centered around the mile-by-mile grid of major streets that follow the boundaries of the township and range system. During this time period, Tulsa saw some of the fastest growth that has occurred in the city's history, consistent with population growth across the United States. Here we see that some streets are becoming curvilinear, though street connectivity remains high. Residential and non-residential uses are substantially separated, and non-residential uses are primarily oriented along linear arterial streets. Beginning in the late 1950s and the 1960s, major changes occurred to the urban form of Tulsa. 2 significant interventions include the introduction of the interstate highway system and the annexation events in the 1960s that more than doubled the size of Tulsa. This area of Tulsa has developed simultaneously with the development of surrounding communities such as Broken Arrow, Owasso, Jinx, and Bixby. Though the growth of this area has been consistent for more than 60 years, the vast majority of developable land has been developed, leading to a decline in the number of properties being built each decade since the 1970s. This urban form is highly autocentric, with residential areas having primarily curvilinear streets with a low level of street connectivity. Uses have become even more separated, with non-residential uses nearly exclusively located at the intersections of major arterial streets. Major streets are intended to serve as both transportation corridors and destination corridors, generating higher rates of traffic congestion. Finally, for areas of the city that have yet to develop, those have been identified as future growth areas. These areas lack streets beyond the mile-by-mile grid, have a lack of public service distribution, things like fire, police, public transit, etc., a lack of utility infrastructure, such as water, sewer, broadband, and more, and often are undeveloped due to geographic constraints such as exposed bedrock and extreme slopes. Over time, as these areas are developed, these constraints should be considered. All of this adds up to the development era map. For each development era, the plan identifies commonalities for many of the land use designations, and this allows for distinction between different areas of the city based on their individual characteristics. Another new aspect of the plan is an online interface our team has developed where you can search by address and see all of the relevant information from the development review guide for a given property. This can be used by anyone anytime, but will be particularly useful for quickly evaluating properties during the development review process. This interface will be readily available on the Tulsa Planning Office website, and the data used will be updated regularly. You can enter an address into the field located at the top of the page, and all of the maps from the Development Review Guide are available to turn on or off in the map. Once you've entered an address and clicked on a property, values from all of the included maps will populate the table describing the specific information for that property. We encourage you to test out the interface to see for yourself what the plan says for different properties across the city. Now I'm going to tell you the ways you can provide feedback on the draft plan. We have two options. First, for those who would prefer to review a hard copy of the plan, we will have copies of the plan available at 10 libraries geographically distributed across the city. Those are listed on this slide, with a library in each city council district, plus the downtown central library. In order to review the documents at a library, you'll need to go to the front counter and ask the staff member to point you to the location of the library where the plan is located. There will also be comment forms and a drop box for completed forms. The forms will let you identify whether your comments are related to a specific plan chapter or general comments regarding the plan. If an online format is your preference, you can visit tulsaplanning.org/planetulsa to find instructions and links to an interactive platform to provide your feedback. Scrolling down the page, you will find a series of icon buttons for each of the chapters of the draft plan. If you click on these buttons, they will take you to a website called Conveo, where you can review the draft content for each chapter. You can leave comments, read other people's comments, and react to comments. This service allows Tulsa Planning Office staff to see your thoughts on specific parts of the plan, and we can reply to questions as well. All chapters have bookmarks to help you navigate. Commenting will be open through the end of February, so please visit tulsaplanning.org/planetulsa and let us know what you think. In closing, if you have any questions that cannot be asked through your comments on Conveo, please email our team at planetulsa@ncog.org or leave us a voicemail at 918-579-9490 and we will respond. Thank you very much.